435 AD. Dawn broke over the Danube in perfect silence. Mist drifted above the river like breath, and the first light touched the towers of Rome's frontier towns. Then, on the far bank, the horizon began to move. It wasn't wind, it was dust, a living wall of it, rising higher, spreading wider, swallowing the sky. 20,000 riders emerged from that cloud, their armor black with pitch, their faces streaked in ash. No banners, no trumpets, only hooves, relentless, rhythmic, endless. The ground shook before the sound reached. Dogs howled, birds scattered, the sun disappeared behind smoke. By sunset, one city would vanish. By week's end, 20 more. And before the moon had turned thrice, 100 Roman towns would burn to their foundations. They had no name yet, only a whisper. The Huns are coming. No army on earth would ever forget how fast death could ride when it came from nowhere. For centuries, Rome had believed its borders eternal. From the Rhine to the Danube, stone watchtowers marked the edge of the world, where discipline met wilderness. Legionaries grew old in garrison towns, raising families beneath red-tiled roofs. Traders passed unarmed through the gates. Farmers plowed fields that had seen 100 peaceful seasons. But peace was a luxury built on distance, and distance was vanishing. Out beyond the forests and plains of the steppe, the wind had changed. Refugees came first, wandering out of the east. Scythians, Goths, Alans, tribes with nothing but terror in their eyes. They spoke of shadows on horseback that never slept, of arrows that fell like rain. The governors laughed. Rome had seen raiders before. Barbarians always came, and Rome always endured. Then the messages stopped coming altogether. Border outposts fell silent. Patrols vanished without a sound. On one gray morning, the watchmen at Byzantium saw a black line moving across the horizon. They thought it was a storm, until the storm split into riders. The first arrows hit before the bells could ring. That day, Rome learned that the steppe had no horizon, only movement. And behind that movement rode 20,000 men who knew no sleep, no mercy, and no borders. The empire's map was about to catch fire. For centuries, Rome had believed its borders eternal. From the Rhine to the Danube, stone watchtowers marked the edge of the world, where discipline met wilderness. Legionaries grew old in garrison towns, raising families beneath red-tiled roofs. Traders passed unarmed through the gates. Farmers plowed fields that had seen 100 peaceful seasons. But peace was a luxury built on distance, and distance was vanishing. Out beyond the forests and plains of the steppe, the wind had changed. Refugees came first, wandering out of the east. Scythians, Goths, Alans, tribes with nothing but terror in their eyes. They spoke of shadows on horseback that never slept, of arrows that fell like rain. The governors laughed. Rome had seen raiders before. Barbarians always came, and Rome always endured. Then the messages stopped coming altogether. Border outposts fell silent. Patrols vanished without a sound. On one gray morning, the watchmen at Byzantium saw a black line moving across the horizon. They thought it was a storm, until the storm split into riders. The first arrows hit before the bells could ring. That day, Rome learned that the steppe had no horizon, only movement. And behind that movement rode 20,000 men who knew no sleep, no mercy, and no borders. The empire's map was about to catch fire. They came from nowhere, or at least from lands no Roman had ever cared to map. Beyond the Volga, beyond the black grasslands where even the sky seemed to crouch low, the Huns were born. Children of smoke and wind, they were raised in motion. Their horses were their homes, their weapons their language. They learned to ride before they could stand, to loose an arrow backward at full gallop before they could write their own names. Not that they had names Rome could pronounce. Their bows were made from horn and sinew, small enough to wield from the saddle, strong enough to pierce armor. Their horses, short and scarred, could run for days without rest, feeding on frost-bitten grass and cold rain. The Huns carried no siege engines, no supply trains. They carried fire. What they needed, they took. What they took, they burned. Their leader was Attila, son of the steppe, a man who spoke little and killed quickly. To his people, he was the voice of heaven's will. To Rome, he would become a curse with a face. His camp was quiet, his soldiers loyal to silence more than gold. When he pointed, they rode. When he stopped, empires fell still. No drums, no marching columns, only hooves, thousands of them, rising and falling in unison, like the pulse of the earth itself. They crossed rivers without bridges, mountains without roads, armies without hesitation. The Romans had built walls, but the Huns did not need to break them. They rode around, waited, and returned when fear had opened the gates for them. To the civilized world, they looked like demons, faces tattooed, eyes narrow against the wind, laughter like metal scraping stone. To themselves, they were messengers. The gods had sent them to cleanse the soft world, and in the spring of that year they began their cleansing. By the time word reached Rome, the Danube frontier was gone, not conquered, but erased. The empire had spent 400 years defending the line. The Huns crossed it in 4 hours. The first city to face them was Margus, a quiet Roman outpost on the Moesian frontier. Its walls had stood for generations, thick, proud, and pointless. At dawn, its priests blessed the gates. By noon, those same gates were ash. The Huns came without formation, without warning, a blur of movement and noise. They rode in loose circles around the city, arrows hissing through the fog like insects. The defenders tried to rally along the parapets, but every time they lifted their heads, someone fell. The air filled with the hum of bowstrings, the crack of splintering shields, the thud of hooves. Then came the fire. Not flaming catapults or siege towers, just oil-soaked cloth wrapped around arrows and loosed into the wind. The dry Roman rooftops caught instantly. Flames ran along the walls like veins of light. Smoke turned the sky red. From a distance, the city looked as though the earth itself had split and was bleeding upward. When the gates fell, the noise stopped. The Huns didn't roar in victory. They simply entered, calm, methodical, efficient. Every man who resisted died. Every building that could burn, burned. The survivors, women, children, slaves, were bound to wagons and sent east. Their city's name was scratched from Roman maps before the embers cooled. The next day, the riders moved on. They left no banners, no warnings, no graves, only blackened stone and the smell of iron rain. For the first time in living memory, Rome had lost a city inside its own borders, not to siege, but to speed. Messengers galloped to nearby garrisons, shouting of demons on horseback, of fire that moved like water. But before their words could reach the governors, the next city was already burning. The empire had always believed destruction was slow. The Huns taught it that death could travel faster than news. From the ruins of Margus, the Huns fanned out like sparks on the wind. Within a week, Viminacium, Nisus, and Sirmium were gone. Cities that had once hosted emperors now reduced to ash and bone. Roads that had carried Roman legions for centuries were choked with smoke and bodies. The empire's proud frontier, 400 miles of fortresses, watchtowers, and trade routes, simply disappeared. No one could stop them, because no one could find them. They did not march. They flowed. By day they vanished into the plains. By night they appeared like thunder. They struck where the roads converged, cutting communication before the alarm could spread. Each raid looked like chaos, until you realized it was a pattern. They were carving a straight path toward the heart of the Balkans. When the legions finally mobilized from the south, they found nothing left to defend. Fields burned for miles. Wells were poisoned. The refugees they met were too terrified to speak. Their clothes blackened, their hair singed by fire. They had seen the Huns ride through entire towns without dismounting, loosing arrows, setting homes ablaze, and vanishing before the first scream reached the walls. In Rome and Constantinople, senators dismissed the reports as exaggerations. "No force moves that fast," they said. But couriers kept coming, fewer each day, their messages shorter, more frantic. They crossed the Morava. They took Singidunum. They are everywhere. In just 10 days, more than 30 cities were gone. Not captured, not occupied, gone. Their temples collapsed, their statues shattered, their names turned into smoke. The land itself seemed hollowed, and behind that emptiness rode 20,000 men who left no footprints, only fire. The Romans had spent centuries mastering war. The Huns turned war into weather, a storm that no army could fight, only endure. And for the first time since the founding of the empire, the world's greatest power realized it could not see the enemy coming until it was already burning. By the second week, word finally reached Ravenna, where the Western emperor held court behind the safety of marshes and ceremony. Courtiers whispered of ghosts on horseback, of entire provinces erased between one imperial meal and the next. Maps were unrolled across marble tables, lines of red ink showing cities that no longer existed. The emperor asked how such a thing could happen. His generals had no answer. Rome had grown old. Its armies were no longer legions of iron, but collections of mercenaries and debts. Veterans who had once conquered the world now guarded tax roads. The Senate still debated policy as if words could stop fire. In the east, Constantinople trembled but did not move. The Huns were not their problem. Not yet. Finally, envoys were sent with gold and oaths of friendship, their horses burdened with treasure. When they found Attila, he was sitting by a river, sharpening his sword on a whetstone blackened by soot. He did not rise when they approached. He listened as they offered peace, tribute, alliance, anything to turn him back. When they finished, he said only, "Rome speaks too much." Then he handed the lead envoy a single arrow. "This is what speaks for me." He took their gold, as he always did, but it did not slow him. It fueled him. His scouts were already deep inside Roman lands, charting the next line of cities to burn. To the empire, gold was wealth. To Attila, it was tinder, something to throw into the fire to make it burn higher. In Constantinople, the patriarch ordered 40 days of fasting. In Rome, the bishops called for divine mercy. But prayer could not move as fast as the Huns. The empire was trying to negotiate with a storm, and out on the plains, the riders kept moving west, 20,000 silhouettes against the red horizon, chasing the sun like predators who feared it might never rise again. The third week began with thunder, not from the sky, but from hooves. The Huns had reached the heart of the Balkans. From the Danube to the Adriatic, every valley glowed at night with fire. Whole provinces vanished between sunrise and sunset. Grain stores erupted into towers of smoke. Towns turned to skeletons of blackened stone. The empire's heartland became a furnace, and the wind carried the smell of it all the way to the Alps. The rhythm was always the same. The sound of hooves first, distant, uncertain. Then the whistle of arrows, the crack of timber, the first screams. Hours later, silence. By the time dust settled, the city was gone. Roman soldiers who survived a single encounter called it riding against thunder. One report that reached Constantinople simply said, "We fought the wind, and the wind had teeth." Attila did not rest. His men rode until their horses collapsed, then took the mounts of the dead. They slept in shifts, one arm still looped through the reins. They did not build camps. They carried the steppe with them. When their arrows ran out, they collected those of their enemies. When their food ran low, they ate it raw. Nothing slowed them. By the 17th day, more than 100 cities were smoke and ruin. Rivers ran black with ash and red with blood. Roman governors abandoned their posts, citizens fled south, and the imperial couriers stopped coming entirely. The frontiers no longer existed. There was only fire and rumor. The Huns were not conquering. They were erasing. They took no territory, built no monuments. They left nothing to rule, only emptiness. Their war was not for land, but for legend. And in that legend, 3 weeks became eternity, the time it took for one empire to remember fear and for another to write its name in fire across the map of the world. When the fires finally dimmed, the Huns stood among the ashes of what had once been Rome's eastern strength. Every road was empty, every outpost gone. Attila dismounted on a hill overlooking the ruins of Nissus, where the air still shimmered from heat. He watched the smoke rise and said nothing. His generals waited for orders that did not come. At last, one asked what message they should send to the emperor. Attila's answer was simple. "Tell him, God rides with me now." That was how the name began, Flagellum Dei, the scourge of God. To the Romans, it was a curse. To the Huns, a crown. They believed heaven itself had given them this mission, not to rule, but to punish. Their priests said the gods had unleashed Attila to scour the world of arrogance, to remind the mighty that all walls burn the same. In Constantinople, panic spread faster than faith. The emperor's council debated flight. Refugees poured into the city from the west, whispering of riders who never bled, who drank from iron cups and smiled at fire. Churches overflowed with people praying for deliverance from a punishment no one understood. Attila ignored it all. He rode westward, eyes fixed on Italy, already dreaming of the plains beyond the Alps. To him, Rome was not an empire. It was a myth waiting to be burned away. His men followed with absolute devotion. To die beneath his banner was to live forever in the wind. That night, as the Huns made camp amid the still warm ruins of Sirmium, Attila sat alone by the fire. He drove his sword into the ground and stared at the stars. In the stillness, the wind whispered across the plains, carrying the faint cries of the dying, the sound of a world ending by inches. To his warriors, he was chosen. To his enemies, he was judgment. To history, he was the moment when Rome's invincibility finally broke, not with surrender, but with silence. When the Huns finally vanished back into the plains, the empire was unrecognizable. From the Black Sea to the Adriatic, there was nothing but ruin. Blackened fields, empty roads, cities that existed now only as scars in the earth. Survivors wandered aimlessly, too few to bury the dead, too numb to rebuild. The frontier that had once defined the limits of civilization had become a graveyard. Rome tried to count its losses but could not. There were no records left to tally, no scribes left alive to write. Governors sent reports written in ash and fear, fragments carried by couriers who died before reaching the capital. It was said that the empire had lost not just land, but memory itself. In Ravenna, the emperor's advisors spoke in whispers. "The gods are angry," one said. "No," replied another. "The gods have left." The great machine of Rome, its armies, its laws, its confidence, had rusted overnight. The legions still existed, but they no longer inspired fear. The empire's enemies had learned that Rome could be broken. Its people had learned something worse, that Rome could burn and the world would go on. Attila's name became a shadow that outlived the smoke. To the east, priests invoked it as warning. To the west, children whispered it at night. The world had seen many conquerors, but never one who destroyed without wanting to rule. Attila did not build empires, he ended them. When travelers crossed the Danube years later, they found forests growing over the ruins of cities that once rivaled capitals. Marble columns buried under moss, temples split by trees, bones tangled in roots. The land had swallowed Rome's pride whole. The illusion of eternity was gone, and in its place, the sound of wind, steady, endless, carrying the echo of hooves that had long since disappeared. The empire was still breathing, but it was only a matter of time before history finished what the Huns had begun. Centuries later, historians would struggle to describe what happened in those 3 weeks. Some called it invasion, others divine punishment. But for those who lived through it, there was no word, only fire, silence, and the memory of hooves that shook the earth. Rome survived in name, but not in soul. The empire that had once believed itself immortal now feared shadows on the horizon. Cities rebuilt on top of ashes learned to live smaller, quieter. Every new wall was built lower than the one before it, as if afraid to challenge the sky again. Attila died years later, not in battle but in his sleep, a single man's heart stopping after ending the heart of a world. His body was buried beneath a river, hidden forever beneath the shifting mud. No tomb, no crown, no empire, only a legend. The wind still carries it across the plains where the grass never stops moving. And somewhere, beneath that same wind, the ghosts of burned cities still whisper the truth. Rome tried to forget that no stone lasts forever, that fear travels faster than armies, and that sometimes the end of the world fits inside the gallop of 20,000 horses. Because empires don't fall in centuries. Sometimes they vanish in 21 days. If stories like this move you, where history burns and humanity is forced to watch, subscribe, and witness how the past still rides beside us, waiting to strike again.